expert interview, and I'm delighted to be joined by Samantha Stone, who is in Massachusetts, if I'm correct. Is that right?
You've got it.
Excellent. And I'm here in San Diego. This is brought to you by SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM. And as I said, I'm John Golden. And today's subject is a really fascinating one. Employee advocacy. And Samantha, who just released a book recently called Unleash Possible, is going to talk to us about a study on employee advocacy. So let's get straight into it, Samantha. So employee advocacy sounds very grand.
It does sound very grand, doesn't it? It also sounds like something that should just happen, right? We should all just be talking about our company and our services and our products because we're employees, right? And it feels so very natural. But the reality is that a lot of employees don't. And there's a lot of good reasons, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And I really wanted to understand when do employees share information? When don't they share information? Why? And kind of dig in. So it was really, under the premise that if our employees are unwilling to advocate for us, how could we expect our customers to do so? Right?
Yeah. I mean, and it's a fascinating observation because, if you stop and think about it for a moment, you would think, well, every employee is surely advocating. They're working there. They're proud of where they work. And then you take a step back and you think, actually, are they? And how many times have you seen somebody in a situation where you say, well, tell me a little bit about what you do in your company? And they're like, they just kind of blow it off or whatever. So what were some of your initial findings about why people do and why employees do advocate and why they don't?
So one of the things that is actually somewhat obvious, which we validated, but I think it was important for us to make sure that our assumption on it was correct, was that passion for your job and for your company and the vision of the company played a really important role. At the end of the day, we can do all kinds of things to incent people, and we could do all kinds of things to make it easy for them to share. But if they don't fundamentally believe in what the company is doing, they're really going to resist sharing at any level of consistency and regularity. And so it was, number one, you have to have vision. People need to understand what that is. And they not only need to understand it, they need to actually care about it.
Right. And I think that's often overlooked because in a lot of companies, and I've worked in plenty of companies over the years and run a couple myself, but you've seen companies, they'll release their mission statement or their vision statement. And first of all, nobody can tell the difference between what's one and what's the other, and why do you need both? But they release it, and it's a bumper sticker, and it's never brought to life for them, right? And it's never brought to life and how it actually impacts them or why it should mean anything to them. So is that something that came across in your study, that people are kind of disconnected?
Yeah, so we talked about, basically we asked people a whole lot of questions. We surveyed about 499, so just shy of 500 people across a wide spectrum of different kinds of organizations and different functions in those organizations. And we roughly mirrored the U.S. employee workforce in terms of percentages. And we asked a whole lot of things. And one of the things we did was we looked at the people who said, yes, I'm passionate. And we looked at their willingness and consistency around sharing compared to those people who said, no, I'm not. And there was a really big delta. And the reason fundamentally is that people perceive, and I think correctly, by the way, that their social sharing is a representation of them, not just their employer. So they share because they want to be smart. They share because they want to promote their own interests. They share because they're proud of what the company is doing and achieving. They do it in a lot of different ways in a lot of different places. So the good news is people are sharing content. The question is, can we get them to share content consistently that not only promotes themselves and their personal role, but also helps support the overall broader advocacy goals of the company?
Right, and that's a very interesting topic that you raised, and I know it's been going on especially for us people who were around before social media was, and have had to deal with.
It's actually my 45th birthday, so I'm really feeling that age today.
Dear. Oh well, it's just a number.
Exactly.
At least that's what we say at this stage. but I guess, I mean, we've had to sort of deal with this unfolding, and this idea of exactly, yeah, who owns your profile, right? So, I mean, if you're on LinkedIn, for instance, I mean, you are representing your company as well as yourself. I mean, that's a given. On other social media platforms, well, it's a little bit more, nebulous, if you like. So how do people get comfortable and realize maybe that, they want to be identified with their company and they want to share, but they also feel a responsibility in what they're sharing, generally to be responsible towards their company. That was a long, convoluted sentence, but I hope you got it.
Yeah, I think I do. I think I understand. And it's actually, a relatively new problem. If
Hmm.
I look back early in my career, the fact was if you were not a PR person, spokesperson, and you didn't go through training,
Yeah,
you said nothing publicly
exactly.
on behalf of your company. And I spent years enforcing that, being on the
Hmm.
marketing side with people. And that's just completely shifted with the advent of LinkedIn and Twitter and, for some businesses, even Snapchat or Pinterest and all those other places that we share information. And here's the good news. The good news is your audience, your customers, your prospects, your partners, your community believe information that comes from your employees more than when it comes from the corporate brand.
Mm,
And that's just because it's coming from people.
right.
So we have an opportunity to encourage employees to share the information that we want to get out into the market. But we also have to be sensitive to why they're doing it, how they're doing it. And one of the biggest differences, the organizations, the people who share the most, have actually documented social media guidelines.
Mm,
Um, and it's not because they're restricting people in those guidelines from doing things. They're freeing people from that worry, from that concern that I don't know what I'm supposed to say. I'm afraid I'm going to say something wrong. What happens if I disagree with a statement that is in conflict to what my company believes?
mhm.
What's going to happen to me? What am I going to do? And so people do have a fear of doing that. And so by writing down the expectations and freeing employees, it actually made a really big positive difference in the number of people who were advocating.
Yeah, that's a great point. And of course, there's always that small few who have absolutely no fear about what they share and can cause all sorts of other
You
problems.
want to give them a little bit of guidance, right?
Yeah.
Well, and it's not just that the document that you've written down the
Mhm.
guidelines. It's because you're training people about why does this help the company? How does it help the company? And you help people understand how to balance their own interests
Mhm.
with the interests of the company and providing them prompts, right? So that was the other big thing is, can I give you a prompt of content that you may want to share that you can then personalize to who you are and what you're trying to represent. Now, the fact is, me sharing information about my consulting practice on my personal Facebook page,
Sure.
in most cases, does not help the company. It might make my grandmother proud, but it's probably not going to do very much. But I do want to provide content that, in appropriate ways and in the right areas, does make sense to, you know, um, attract new talent, right? If you're trying
Mhm.
to hire. It's not only about customers and prospects, but it's also about your peer group
Right.
of people that you might want to come work within the company someday.
Yeah, that's a great point about how, attracting people, how existing employees play a big role in that. What were some of the more surprising results that came out of the survey?
I have to tell you, I expected, we did break it down by the role that the person
Hmm.
played, and we looked at salespeople in particular. And I'll be honest, I thought salespeople were just going to be killing it
Hmm.
in sharing, and that would be perceived as their job,
Yeah.
right? Part of our job is to always be out looking and advocating on behalf. And something really interesting turned out was that salespeople did share content, but the kind of content they shared tended to be pretty limited. It tended to be about product information,
Hmm.
and the company information, and that they actually weren't very comfortable with doing other kinds of more broad advocacy on behalf of sort of the mission of the company and things. They would sort of champion, we had a great quarter, or we won this customer, or we got an award,
Hmm.
right? Which are good things, by the way, and they
Yep.
should be
Absolutely.
celebrated. But they weren't very comfortable sharing and talking about this particular piece of content, this insight about the industry,
Hmm.
perhaps. or some problem or challenge that your product or service solved. So I was actually surprised by that because I thought that group of people would bubble up as extremely good at it.
Yeah, that
The
is
other
surprising.
thing that the other thing I thought was really interesting was not surprising. Millennials were great at sharing, right? They were very comfortable at social, but they actually were not so great at sharing. They didn't know what to share for their corporate world. So they're extremely comfortable talking about their job and their profession, but they weren't as comfortable as I thought they would be in terms of talking about the company and the product or the service.
Yeah,
So
that's really an interesting thought because, obviously us people who are not millennials, they're a fascinating group of people to try and understand. So what is that, if anything, does that say about the millennial mindset in that, as you said, they're very comfortable about their job, about their role, about themselves, about the things that directly surround them, but the larger corporation or the corporate strategy, goals, message, whatever, maybe a little less connected to.
yeah. I think what it's a reflection of is we forget that most of the millennials that we interact with, we take for granted that they understand social, and we don't always take the time to understand it in the context of the business or the organization they're now part of. And many millennials, not all, many millennials, this is the beginning of their career. And they have the same trepidation that Gen X did, that baby boomers at the beginning of our careers. We don't always know what to say about our company or our service or our product. And so we hesitate. And in fact, the research showed that regardless of your generation, in the first few months of working, people didn't share very much.
Right.
And it was that same thing. So I think, to me, the good news is they know the channel. We don't need to teach them the channel, but we need to help them with, and we shouldn't ignore that connection to the business. And I think we sometimes say, oh, millennials know how to do it. I'm going to go focus on this other group of people. And that's probably a mistake.
Right. And then, so what are some other ways that companies can turn employees into advocates? What are some of the other things that persuade an employee to really want to boast about the company they work for?
Incentives are very real. When we asked people what would incent you to take action, they responded to things like it's considered part of my job. It's in my job description. There's recognition from my management or from the company overall when I do that. There was sort of a high signal that if you pay me monetarily to do it, I will. I add a caution to that because I don't think the lesson is pay per post, but I think the lesson is run some contests, create some momentum, get people comfortable with it, and doing some kinds of playful monetary things, prize-oriented things there can be very helpful. But the biggest thing is write down a policy, train people why it's there, how to use it, and give them prompts. And there are certainly a whole set of technologies that can help automate that process. Well, automate might be the wrong word. They can help scale that process. And I think for larger organizations, those tools can be extremely helpful. But at the end of the day, it's about being consciously aware that employees have this ability to connect with the audience in ways that our corporate brand, Twitter handle, or LinkedIn pages simply can't. And so we have an opportunity to help create that passion and stir it and encourage it. And the only other sort of cautionary tale that I think is pointing out here on this is a lot of times what we'll do is somebody will send out an email. It says, here's your 4 tweets, everybody, send them out today, right? We've all knows I've been guilty of writing.
Yeah, I'm going to say, whoops.
I admit it. But what happens is the people who are comfortable with that format and that message will send it. No one else will. So what we have to do is if you're going to do that sort of, just like we have customer segmentation, we should have internal employee segmentation based on what's important to people. And we should help craft messages and content and not expect everybody to send everything, but direct things to different people based on their role, even their gender plays a little bit of a role, their generation, their function in the company, what their job is. All of those things play a role. And so we shouldn't just send everybody the same set of content and expect it to be shared equally across the board.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic insight and a great tip, and I'm making note of it myself here because I'm just thinking as we're talking, I'm thinking, yeah, if you maybe work in the design department, maybe something more, corporate-y that your execs would send out
Yes.
was not something that your designers may feel, but if there was something maybe you have done something interesting with your, new logo or something that may be more interesting to them. Yeah, that's a great point.
It's topic. It's also format of the content. Tone of the content sometimes is different depending on who you are and what your function and job is. And we have to sort of let go of this notion that our employees do need to be aligned to our corporate messaging. I'm not suggesting that we sort of wholesale separate those two things, but we have to let them be themselves.
Right.
And we have to let that personality come out, and we have to reward and recognize when people are doing a good job of it, because it sort of creates a cascading effect.
And so where have you, in the work that you've done, where have you seen employee advocacy really working? You don't have to name companies, but where have you seen it working really well? And how do you recognize a company that has really good employee advocacy going on?
I think it's hard to tell the companies sort of just from the outside who do it well, unless you have a really good sense of who their employees are and you can follow them and track them and do that. But you can tell by going to any event how impassioned employees are in those environments. When you call up and you talk to a call center person, how do they come through, right? All of that is a sign of their the likelihood that they're going to be good employee advocates in general.
Right.
And then you can kind of come in, like, there's no magical, small companies do a good job, big companies do a good job, tech companies do a good job, consumer product companies do a good job. It really isn't a reflection of what the company does so much as a reflection of how well and how much we've paid attention to this. Right. And there is a little bit of a correlation. We also looked at, for example, if my company is declining in revenue, does that decrease what I'm sharing? Sure, because there's sort of negative perceptions. If we're skyrocketing and we're growing really fast, does that increase? Sure, there's some natural things. So the health of the company is going to play a role in advocacy, but overall, typically what you find is you frequently find maybe 5%, 10% of a company's employees are advocating on a consistent and regular basis. I've seen companies pay attention to this and they get it up to 30, 40%, 50% of a company. And that's a huge difference, right? And the amount and number of voices. And so it takes thinking about this, training people, documenting what you're trying to do, setting goals, right? Recognizing people who are doing a good success, and not forgetting the non-customer facing parts of the business. One of my favorite success stories is I was working with a software company. They were relatively small software companies, somewhere between $5 and $10 million in revenue. They had maybe 40 employees, something like that. And they had a good high energy company. People were passionate about the business, but the same 10 people shared content all the time and no one else. And they made a concerted effort to change that and to think about different kinds of content prompts and to train people on why this is important and how to do it, and to give them permission to be comfortable with this whole notion. And they had their controllers sharing content and sending things and pictures of the company party that they were at, and and their support team, people who we don't realize, but they may be behind the scenes to customers, but when they're out in the market talking about how exciting it is and how thrilled they are, they're reaching a whole new network of people that we otherwise might not be able to tap into.
Yeah, well, that's a fantastic example because, if you've got controllers being enthusiastic and sharing, where you've really cracked the code there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, this is great, Samantha. We're bumping up against time here. I mean, this is a fascinating subject, and as you can see, the time has flown. We could talk about this for a long time more, but I just wanted to give you a moment to let the viewers know a little bit more about you, how they can contact you, find out more about your company, find out more about your study.
Excellent. Excellent. My pleasure. You can find me in all the usual places. So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter at Samantha Stone. I also have the research is published on marketingadvisorynetwork.com. I know that's a terrible mouthful. So if anybody wants to reach out on LinkedIn or Twitter and just send me a little note that you're looking for it, I'm happy to send the link out. The study has loads and loads of data points and things. And I think it's really interesting. And most of the folks that I know who are starting to read it are starting to apply some of the tips and tricks in it, and they're seeing some good results. So mission accomplished. That's what we hoped.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've taken some tips away from it too. So again, listen, Samantha, this has been fantastic. My name is John Golden, SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine and Pipeline of CRM. See you for another expert interview really soon.